Hashtag strangers found a baby in a bullet box, and the gunslinger placed the child on the judge's bench. The sound came first. 3 sharp cracks that split the morning air. Then silence. 5 men stood in the town square of Lonesome Hollow, dust swirling around their boots. They'd followed the gunshots, each face weathered different by the same hard years. The tallest, Hank Miller, pointed toward an abandoned wagon near the livery. Over there. They approached cautiously, hands hovering near holsters. No movement from the wagon. Just a wooden ammunition box left on the driver's seat, its lid slightly ajar. The box was military issue, the kind that held Springfield rifle rounds during the war. Silas Tucker reached it first. When he lifted the lid, his breath caught. Jesus Christ. Nestled among spent brass casings lay a baby, no more than 6 months old. Eyes wide open, regarding them with a quiet curiosity that seemed impossible in a child so young. The infant wore only a thin cotton wrap, one tiny hand clutching a shell casing like a toy. The men stood frozen, unsure what to do with such innocence amid their rough lives. 4 stepped back instinctively, but one moved forward. Elias Cord had killed 17 men that anyone knew of. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, had watched the light fade from faces across 3 territories. Now those same eyes studied the child with something between wonder and dread. He holstered his Remington and reached down with calloused hands. The baby didn't cry when he lifted it, just stared at him with eyes dark as wet coal. "Whose is it?" someone asked. Elias scanned the empty streets. "Don't know. What you gonna do with it?" Elias didn't answer. He just held the child against his chest, feeling its heart flutter like a trapped bird against his own. The town of Lonesome Hollow sprawled across a dry valley where 2 creeks had once met before the drought took them. What remained was a collection of sun-bleached buildings that seemed to sink further into the earth each year. A place where people came to disappear, or to forget, or sometimes both. Most buildings faced the main street, the saloon, general store, and livery stable forming the town's spine. At the northern end stood the courthouse, a 2-story structure of locally quarried stone that seemed to judge the lesser buildings around it. Elias lived in a small cabin a mile outside town. It had a good well and a view of the canyon that turned gold at sunset. He built it himself after returning from the war, wanting distance from other men's business. The cabin had 1 room, a stone fireplace, and little else. No photographs on the walls, no keepsakes. Just the necessities for a man who expected little from life. People in Lonesome Hollow knew Elias by reputation more than conversation. He came to town for supplies once a week, drank alone at the corner table in Whitaker's saloon on Saturday nights, and sometimes took work as a tracker or hired gun when money ran short. He never started trouble, but those who crossed him didn't get a second chance. What few knew was that Elias carried a faded tintype in his breast pocket. A woman with serious eyes and dark hair pulled severely back. On rare nights, when the whiskey loosened the knot in his chest, he would take it out and look at it by lantern light, his fingers tracing the outline of her face. The baby changed everything about Elias's routine. He fashioned a sling from an old shirt to carry the child against his chest. He boiled clean rags for diapers and traded his best hunting knife for goat's milk at the Wilson farm. At night, he placed the child on his bedroll and slept on the floor beside it, one hand always near his gun. For 3 days, he barely slept. The baby would wake crying, and Elias would pace the cabin floor, bouncing it gently until it quieted. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was different, softer than anyone in Lonesome Hollow would have believed possible. "You're all right," he would murmur. "You're safe now." On the 4th evening, as Elias sat on his cabin porch with the sleeping child, a rider approached. It was young Billy Hatcher from the telegraph office, looking nervous. "Mr. Cord? Got something for you." He handed over an envelope and backed away quickly, not waiting for a reply. The envelope bore the seal of Judge Isaac Monroe, the circuit judge who presided over Lonesome Hollow and 6 other settlements in the territory. Elias broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. "Your presence is requested at the courthouse tomorrow at noon to discuss matters of grave importance regarding the child in your possession. Absence will be considered contempt of court." Elias folded the paper and watched Billy's dust trail disappear toward town. The baby stirred against his chest, making small sounds like a dreaming puppy. "Looks like we've got an appointment," Elias said. Morning came with a sky the color of beaten copper. Elias dressed in his cleanest shirt and gave the baby a bath in a shallow basin on the porch. The child splashed and gurgled, showing no fear of the man whose hands had ended so many lives. Elias saddled his horse, a dun gelding with 1 white sock, and fashioned a carrying sling across his chest. He placed the baby inside, checked his Remington, and rode toward town. Lonesome Hollow looked different in the harsh morning light, more fragile somehow. People stopped to stare as he passed. Some nodded, others quickly looked away. Word had spread about the baby and about Elias taking it in. The courthouse steps were empty when he arrived. Elias dismounted carefully, one hand supporting the child against his chest. The massive oak doors creaked as he pushed them open. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of old paper and wood polish. The courtroom was empty except for Judge Monroe, who sat at his bench reading through documents. He was a lean man in his 60s with a close-cropped white beard and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Cord," the judge said without looking up. "You're early." "Yes, sir." "Bring the child forward." Elias approached the bench, each footstep echoing in the empty room. The baby was awake, eyes darting around at the unfamiliar surroundings. Judge Monroe set his papers aside and looked at the child, then at Elias. "I understand you found this infant 4 days ago." "Yes, sir." "In an ammunition box near Whitaker's livery. And you took it upon yourself to assume care of the child." It wasn't a question, but Elias answered anyway. "Yes, sir." The judge studied him for a long moment. "You're aware of your reputation in this territory, Mr. Cord?" Elias met his gaze steadily. "I am." "Then you understand my concern about a man of your history taking charge of an infant." The baby chose that moment to reach up and grab a fistful of Elias's beard. He gently disentangled the tiny fingers. "I understand your concern, Judge. But the child needs someone." Judge Monroe leaned back in his chair. "Several families in town have offered to take the baby. The Wilsons have 6 children already. The Parkers lost their youngest last winter and have been praying for another. Both would provide a proper home." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I see. Do you? This child deserves a mother and father, a Christian upbringing, stability." The judge tapped his fingers on the bench. "What can you offer that would compare?" Elias looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep against his chest. The answer that came to his lips surprised him. "Protection," he said quietly, "and a chance to choose their own path." Judge Monroe's expression remained neutral. "The court will consider all options. In the meantime, Sheriff Dawson will check on the child's welfare daily. You will bring the infant here again in 1 week's time." He picked up his gavel. "That will be all, Mr. Cord." Elias nodded and turned to leave. "One more thing," the judge called after him. "Have you given the child a name?" Elias paused at the door. "No, sir. Didn't see my place." "I see. Well, for the court records, we'll need something to call it. Boy or girl?" Elias looked down at the sleeping face. In truth, he hadn't checked. He carefully moved the blanket aside. "A girl," he said softly. The judge made a note. "Very well. Return in 1 week, Mr. Cord." Outside, the sun had climbed higher, burning away the morning coolness. Elias mounted his horse and headed not toward his cabin but to the general store. He had supplies to buy, proper clothes for a baby girl, soft blankets, milk. As he rode, he found himself talking to the child, his voice low. "Don't worry about the judge. He's fair, even if he is a hard man." He adjusted the sling. "And don't worry about those families either. They're good people, but—" He trailed off, not sure why the thought of handing her over felt like a stone in his gut. The general store was nearly empty when Elias entered. Mrs. Porter, the proprietor's wife, looked up from her ledger and froze. Her eyes went to the bundle against his chest. "Mr. Cord," she said carefully, "what can I help you with today?" "Need some things for the baby," he said, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Mrs. Porter's expression softened slightly. "I heard you found an abandoned child. May I?" She approached with her hands outstretched. Elias hesitated, then carefully lifted the baby from the sling. Mrs. Porter took her with practiced hands, cooing softly. "Oh, she's beautiful. How old do you think she is?" "Don't know much about babies," Elias admitted. "Few months, maybe." Mrs. Porter checked the child's gums and nodded. 4, perhaps 5 months. Healthy, too, from the look of her. She glanced at Elias. "You'll need proper things if you're caring for her." For the next half hour, Mrs. Porter gathered supplies, soft cotton diapers, baby clothes, a small tin bathtub, bottles, and powdered milk formula. She demonstrated how to prepare the milk and how to hold the baby while feeding. Elias watched intently, his usual stoicism replaced by careful attention. When it came time to pay, he emptied his coin purse without hesitation. "Thank you," he said, loading the supplies into his saddlebags. Mrs. Porter handed the baby back to him. "She needs a name, Mr. Cord." Elias settled the child back into the sling. "Judge says he'll decide that next week. When he decides who keeps her." Mrs. Porter's face showed surprise. And who might that be, if not you? Wilson's or Parker's, he said. Mrs. Porter made a small sound. Well, they're fine families, to be sure. She hesitated. But a child knows who holds them safe. Remember that, Mr. Court. Elias nodded and left the store, feeling the weight of the baby against his chest and the heavier weight of the week ahead. The days fell into a pattern. Elias would wake before dawn, feed the baby, and go about his chores with her secured against him. Sheriff Dawson would ride out mid-morning, ask a few questions, and leave with a grudging nod. The baby grew more animated, watching Elias with dark eyes that seemed to hold questions he couldn't answer. At night, he would sit on the porch and tell her about the stars, about the mountains to the west, about the deer that came to drink at the creek bed even though it had been dry for years. He found himself telling her things he'd never spoken aloud, about the war, about the woman in the tintype, about the weight that lived in his chest. On the fifth day, while cleaning the ammunition box the baby had been found in, Elias noticed something odd. The bottom didn't sit quite flush. He ran his fingers along the edges and found a slight gap at one corner. When he pressed it, a hidden compartment popped open. Inside lay a folded piece of paper, stained and wrinkled. Elias opened it carefully. The handwriting was cramped but legible, a woman's hand. To whoever finds my daughter, her name is Sarah, after my mother. Her father was a cruel man who would kill us both if he found us. I have consumption and won't live to see winter. Please keep her safe. Tell her someday that her mother loved her enough to let her go. May God forgive me. There was no signature. Elias read the note 3 times, then folded it and placed it in his shirt pocket, next to the tintype. He went outside where the baby, Sarah, lay on a blanket in the shade, watching leaves move in the breeze. Sarah, he said, testing the name. The baby turned her head at the sound of his voice and made a small, happy noise. Elias knelt beside her. Your mama loved you, he said softly. She wanted you safe. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, watching Sarah dream in her makeshift crib, a drawer lined with soft blankets. The note had changed something. The child was no longer just the baby, but Sarah, a person with a history, with a mother who had loved her and feared for her. He took out the tintype and studied the woman's face in the firelight. Margaret, his wife for less than a year before the fever took her. They had talked about children, about the family they would build together. Dreams that died with her. What would you tell me to do, Maggie? He whispered. The next morning, Elias saddled his horse earlier than usual. He secured Sarah against his chest and rode not toward town but up into the foothills where the junipers grew thick. He dismounted at a small clearing and walked to a simple wooden cross driven into the ground. This is Margaret, he told Sarah, who watched him with solemn eyes. She would have known what to do with you. She knew about loving things. He stood there for a long time, the baby warm against his chest, the wind moving through the junipers with a sound like distant water. When he returned to his cabin, a horse was tied outside. Judge Monroe sat on the porch, his black coat stark against the weathered wood. Mr. Court, the judge said, rising. I thought we might speak privately before our official meeting tomorrow. Elias dismounted carefully. Judge, may I come in? Elias nodded and led the way inside. The cabin was sparse but clean. The judge's eyes took in the baby things arranged neatly on a shelf, the drawer crib near the fireplace, the tin bathtub hanging on a peg. You've made accommodations, he observed. Yes, sir. May I? The judge gestured toward Sarah. Elias hesitated, then gently lifted her from the sling and handed her to the judge. Monroe held her with surprising ease, studying her face. She looks well cared for, he admitted. She is. The judge walked to the cabin's single window, still holding Sarah. I've received quite a few visitors this week. Mrs. Porter from the general store. Sheriff Dawson. Even old Doc Willis stopped by. He turned back to Elias. All singing your praises as a caretaker, surprisingly enough. Elias said nothing. I've also received a letter from the territorial governor. It seems word of our unusual situation has reached Santa Fe. The judge bounced Sarah gently when she fussed. The governor suggests that in the absence of blood relatives, the child's current guardian should be given preference, assuming basic requirements of care and safety are met. Hope flickered in Elias's chest, but he kept his face neutral. I see. Do you? Judge Monroe's eyes were sharp. Taking in a stray dog is one thing, Mr. Court. Raising a child is quite another. This girl will need education, moral guidance, a woman's influence as she grows. I understand that. Do you? Because once I make this decision, I won't unmake it easily. The judge handed Sarah back to Elias. She'll be your responsibility. Completely. In the eyes of God and the law. Elias took Sarah, feeling her small weight settle against him like it belonged there. I found something, he said. In the box she came in. He shifted the baby to one arm and retrieved the note from his pocket, handing it to the judge. Monroe read it, his expression grave. Sarah, he said quietly. A good name. Yes, sir. The judge folded the note and returned it. Her mother made a choice, entrusting her to whoever found her. He studied Elias's face. Providence saw fit that it was you. I'll do right by her, Elias said simply. I believe you will. The judge moved toward the door. I'll see you both tomorrow at noon. We'll make it official. After the judge left, Elias sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the sun sink toward the canyon rim. The child reached up and patted his bearded cheek with a small hand, and something tight in Elias's chest loosened slightly. Sarah, he said softly. Your mama named you Sarah. The morning of the court hearing dawned clear and hot. Elias dressed in his Sunday clothes, a dark wool suit he hadn't worn since Margaret's funeral. He bathed Sarah and dressed her in a new white gown Mrs. Porter had sent out to the cabin. As they rode into town, Elias noticed more people than usual on the streets. Word of the hearing had spread. Faces turned to watch them pass, expressions ranging from curiosity to open disapproval. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Elias recognized the Wilsons and the Parkers standing together near the steps, their expressions tense. Mrs. Wilson held a small blanket, as if expecting to wrap a baby in it soon. Elias dismounted and nodded to the families. Morning. They murmured greetings, eyes fixed on Sarah. Mrs. Parker stepped forward, her face kind but determined. Mr. Cord, we just want what's best for the child. A baby needs a mother. Before Elias could respond, the courthouse doors opened, and Sheriff Dawson appeared. Judge is ready, he announced. Inside, the courtroom was full. It seemed everyone in Lonesome Hollow had come to witness the proceedings. Judge Monroe sat at the bench, his face impassive as Elias walked down the center aisle with Sarah. This informal hearing is now in session, the judge announced. We are here to determine the permanent guardianship of the infant girl known as Sarah, found abandoned in this town 6 days ago. He gestured for Elias to approach the bench. Mr. Elias Cord has been the child's caretaker since finding her. The Wilson and Parker families have also petitioned for guardianship. Mrs. Wilson stepped forward. Your Honor, my husband and I have 6 healthy children. We know how to raise a child proper, with siblings and mother's care. Mrs. Parker spoke next, her voice trembling slightly. We lost our Johnny last winter. We have a nursery already, and my heart has so much love to give. The judge nodded. Your offers are noted and appreciated. He turned to Elias. Mr. Cord, do you wish to speak on your own behalf? Elias looked down at Sarah, then at the crowded courtroom. He'd never been one for speeches. I found her, he said simply. She was left for whoever came along. That was me. He shifted Sarah in his arms so the judge could see her face. I don't know much about raising children, but I know about keeping promises. I promised to keep her safe, to give her what she needs, to let her become whoever she's meant to be. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Monroe raised a hand for silence. I've considered this matter carefully, he said. The law gives preference to blood relatives in such cases, but none have come forward. In their absence, we must consider what serves the child's best interest. He looked at the Wilsons and Parkers. Both your families would provide loving homes, and I thank you for your generous offers. Mrs. Parker began to smile, but the judge continued. However, I am persuaded that the child has already formed an attachment to her current guardian. Mr. Cord has demonstrated both the ability and commitment to provide proper care. He picked up his gavel. It is therefore the ruling of this court that Elias Cord shall be granted full legal guardianship of the child known as Sarah, with all rights and responsibilities therein. He struck the gavel once. So ordered. The courtroom erupted in voices, some approving, others protesting. Judge Monroe raised his hand again. There is one more matter, he said when quiet returned. Mr. Cord, please approach the bench with the child. Elias walked forward, confused. The judge gestured for him to place Sarah on the bench before him. Hesitantly, Elias laid her down on the polished wood. She looked tiny there, her eyes wide as she stared up at the judge. Judge Monroe placed his hand gently on her head. By the authority vested in me by the territorial court, I hereby recognize this child as Sarah Cord, ward and legal daughter of Elias Cord, with all rights of a natural-born child. He looked at Elias. She will need your surname for school records and legal documents as she grows. Elias stared at the judge, then at Sarah. His daughter. The word felt foreign and right at the same time. "Thank you, Your Honor," he managed. The judge nodded. "Take good care of her, Mr. Court. The court will check on her welfare periodically." His stern expression softened slightly. "Though I suspect we'll find nothing to concern us." Elias lifted Sarah from the bench and held her against his chest. As he turned to leave, he saw Mrs. Porter smiling from the back row. Sheriff Dawson gave him a respectful nod. Even Mrs. Parker, disappointed as she must have been, offered a small smile. "Congratulations," she said softly as he passed. "If you ever need help or advice." "Thank you," Elias said. "I expect I'll need plenty of both." Outside, the sun was high and bright. Elias stood on the courthouse steps, feeling the weight of Sarah in his arms and the weight of the future stretching before them. For the first time in years, that future held something more than survival. He walked down the steps and mounted his horse, securing Sarah in her sling. As they rode out of town, he felt eyes following them. Some doubtful, some hopeful, all watching to see what would come of the gunslinger and the baby found in a bullet box. 3 years passed like a slow river, carving new channels through familiar land. Elias's cabin gained a second room, a small bedroom for Sarah with a window facing east so the morning sun would wake her. He built a fence around the yard to keep her from wandering too close to the canyon edge. A vegetable garden appeared beside the well, growing beans and carrots and corn that Sarah helped plant with her small hands. Elias still wore his Remington, but it stayed holstered more often. He took work breaking horses at the Wilson Ranch, steady pay that let him stay close to home. On Sundays, he and Sarah would ride into town for supplies and stop at Mrs. Porter's for tea and conversation. Sarah grew from a baby into a little girl with dark curls and serious eyes that could suddenly spark with laughter. She followed Elias everywhere, asking endless questions that he answered with patient honesty. At night, he read to her from books Mrs. Porter lent them, stories about faraway places and brave children and animals that could talk. Once a month, they rode up to the foothills to visit Margaret's grave. Elias would stand quietly while Sarah placed wildflowers on the mound and told Margaret about her adventures. "Papa says you would have liked my new dress," she would say. "He's not good at braiding hair, but he tries real hard." On Sarah's 4th birthday, Elias took her to the courthouse. Judge Monroe, now stooped with age but still sharp-eyed, presented her with a book of children's poems. "For when your father has read all of Mrs. Porter's books to you," he said with a rare smile. As they left the courthouse, Sarah looked up at the judge's bench. "Papa, why do you always touch the bench when we leave?" Elias hadn't realized she'd noticed. Each time they visited the courthouse, he would place his hand briefly on the spot where he had laid her that day. "That's where you became mine," he said simply. "Where the judge said we were family." Sarah considered this, then nodded. "Can I touch it too?" Elias lifted her up, and she placed her small hand on the polished wood. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lonesome Hollow. The town had changed little, still dusty, still quiet, still a place where people came to disappear. But for Elias and Sarah, it had become something else, a beginning rather than an end. As they rode home, Sarah falling asleep against his chest just as she had that first day, Elias noticed something in the dust near the livery, a spent cartridge gleaming in the late sunlight. He reined in his horse and dismounted carefully, not wanting to wake Sarah. He picked up the brass shell and turned it in his fingers. Once, such things had been the markers of his life, brass casings that measured days and bullets fired. Now they seemed like relics from another time, another man. Elias pocketed the shell and remounted, holding Sarah secure against him. As they rode toward home, the setting sun turned the canyon walls to gold, and Sarah stirred against his chest. "Papa," she murmured sleepily. "I'm here," he said. "We're going home." And they rode on, the gunslinger and his daughter, leaving behind the bullet and the dust, a small, empty thing that once held fire but now held only memory. Total _char_count, 26,428.